Hello everyone, welcome. Hello everyone, welcome. I'm looking forward to this stream today. Welcome. I'm looking forward to this stream today. Welcome. I'm looking forward to this stream today. Switch off the sound of my own chat. Okay, better. Great. So, I'm happy to have you here, everyone. Everyone right now seems to be two people, so maybe we wait for another minute or two until more people trickle in. But I'm very, very happy to host Tim Möller here today, who is a psychologist and soon to be graduated PhD. And I very much look forward to what he has to say today about using heart rate in virtual reality, because that's a lot of what the research was about. Before I introduce you further, maybe it's best if you say a few words about yourself. So yeah, just who are you and what do you do? Yeah.
Yes, I'm Tim Möller, and yeah, I'm a psychologist by training. I majored in cognitive neuropsychology, and yeah, found the realms in virtual reality. I use virtual reality a lot for my PhD in the field of computational psychiatry and psychology. And so I've had several research projects there going on. And at the same time, I'm also a psychotherapist in training right now at the Federal Armed Forces Hospital of Germany. And I'm also doing lectures. I'm giving lectures at two different universities and other institutions. And yeah, that's basically these days what I do the most.
Great, great. It's very, very interesting what you're doing. I'm sure that there are plenty of people interested in this very practical application of psychotherapy in this case. But before we dive into that, I know it's not a very fun story, but I'm sorry. I would really like to discuss a little bit or talk a little bit about your journey through your PhD and your work there, your experiences there, and how you arrived in where you are now. Also, how you arrived in doing a PhD in the first place, and just this transition, because I think so the audience today or the audience in general on Twitch is not very research focused, and I think it's very, very good to show a little bit about what research can be like, and what are the good parts, what are the bad parts. And I think we should not rule out the fact that there are bad parts, as you have experienced. And yeah, so maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So, usually you don't see this failure of people, and you only see where they at the end of the story, but not what they brought them there. So, also for me, it was quite tricky, as some of you, especially in Germany, know it. Psychology is also kind of tough to get in, and it's also still quite hard to continue. So, not only to start it. And so after my bachelor, I actually wanted to stay in my hometown and the city where I did this, and I had a
Where are
GDP
you
of
from?
1.6, I believe. So it's not too bad, but it was only sufficient for 2 out of 22 universities that I applied to. And yeah, so it's pretty tough. So what I learned throughout this journey is to always be open and to be opportunistic about it. And so it's actually a very interesting story how I ended up with this research that I'm doing right now, very much related to the whole self concept and consciousness. How can you investigate the self? And is there even a self? And at what disorders of the self can you look like? Schizophrenia, borderline personality, and so on. And yeah, not only to get into the research program is quite trick or the master's program, but also apparently to find accommodations in Berlin and other cities. And so I had to do a lot of couch surfing. Actually, the first 6 weeks I had to couch search when I did my finished, oh, I started my master's program. And it just happened to be that I was crashing on the couch of this one person, and her boyfriend was actually also in research and it's the same master's as I did, and also a PhD. and we got along well together. And then at one point he offered a master thesis, which was doing the rubber hand illusion and having a look at self disorders in patients with borderline personality disorder. And this is also my field. I did before that a lot of internships in that regard. It was really my interest, paired with the philosophical aspects of what the self is. And yeah, then I happened to do the research in borderline personality disorder. And this kind of sets the ground for me with this whole methods part uh, for my PhD program, which was to have a look at the sense of self in patients with schizophrenia. And we actually these days also use similar methods, not just the rubber hand illusion, but we extended it to the virtual cardiac rubber hand illusion in patients with schizophrenia. And so this was very well fitting. And again, I was quite opportunistic about the situation, had a look which projects are offering a PhD, also in which field. And at one point, there was this offer in Berlin, and I actually got it. And I had to say it was mainly because of my prior experience of the methods that I knew, and I believe it was not that much about the grades in the end, but rather because it was so fitting. And if I didn't crashed on the couch of this nice woman back then I wouldn't have got my master's thesis, and I believe not my PhD in this field. So this is kind of the story how I got into the PhD. And from the PhD on, it was also a whole nother journey. So we're actually, after 4.5 years of this PhD, still in the mode of acquiring patients because it's really, really hard to get patients and to get enough participants. Also, there were, another few other pitfalls and difficulties. One thing was called the so-called Corona pandemic. I'm sure you heard of that. And yeah, that had
What?
the interesting result that I had to wait for some of the equipment for more than 2 years. No, I actually didn't have to wait for it for 2 years, but I had to wait 2 years longer. And yeah, as you can imagine, this was very tricky to do my originally planned research when the equipment is not there. So these projects are still running. And actually, none of my core projects are finished, with which I started the PhD. However, other projects, other side projects, all the other things that came along the road that I took opportunistically kind of end up with a nice potpourri of several different studies, with which I'm also handing in my PhD thesis. Yeah, and so in the end, if you wish, I wrote two different dissertations. So I had everything ready, basically, 150 pages, and just the results were missing, which are still missing. And then at one point dropping it and starting basically a completely new PhD thesis with a completely new topic and with complete new experimental paradigms. Yeah, and this kind of led to where I am right now and what I'm doing right now. But this is something you usually don't see when you talk about, yeah, doing the PhD and doing your master's. So this is everything that stays hidden.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I feel like the most. It's actually more common to have these very chaotic trajectories in a career in research, right? It's more common to have that than a straightforward planned path. For example, it's very funny for me. My CV looks very straightforward, but it never felt like it. It was also very similar. That I had like a 1 year contract. I had like a student assistantship somewhere, and then I read an email and just it sounded too good to be true. I just answered that, hey, I'm not even graduated yet. Would I fit for the role? And a week later, I got the job, where I wasn't even done with my studies. That yeah, back then it was very funny and very chaotic. And in the meantime, I also classic thing. I wanted to start my own cafe instead of continuing in the academic route. I feel like
Yeah,
that's
I
also
heard many
very
of these
common.
stories.
Yeah,
So I actually
exactly.
never heard a story where one was finishing actually on the straight path his PhD,
Yeah,
and that at one point other concept popped out. So
yeah.
one person I got to know is now doing pottery, which is quite interesting.
Pottery.
Pottery, yes, yeah, which
Okay.
is quite interesting
Yeah.
since he was also involved in this whole like self science and of certain objects, how you experience objects. So especially when you talk about the self and consciousness, so what is experience really? What is qualia? And so that had
Mm-hmm.
this interesting effect that he kind of preferred to do things with his own hands and to create things. And so this is always his debate of yeah, creating something and having something that you can actually see
Mm-hmm.
versus something more abstract. Also, I remembered when I had my first draft of the PhD thesis after 4.5 years. I was copying it, took the computer like 2 seconds, and was like, wait a second. 4.5 years for basically 2 seconds of data, and what did I do the whole year? It's basically the whole 4.5 years.
Yeah.
So the job as a scientist, to the most extent, even in psychology, where you work with people,
Mm.
is, correct me if I'm wrong, 80%, 90% to move around pixels on the screen.
Mm.
And so it's nice for a while to also see something that you actually create when you can, at the end of the day, say, well, I built a thing, I constructed it, and it's something that you can grasp more easily
Yeah.
compared to all the digital things that you do on the computer with moving the pixels around.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this brings us kind of a bit to your current position, right? Because that's also not as abstract as the research would be. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're doing right now and how that happened.
So my current job at the psychotherapy training, you mean? Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, at the same time, I always so aside from research, I want to stick a little bit in research still and to continue these projects, but usually these projects kind of continue several years. And so they can be rewarding, but it's on a long-term time horizon. And so what I really like and how I originally started my journey to study psychology was to have an influence on people, to
Mm.
have a positive impact, to see how people are struggling and what methods and techniques can you use to ease the pain and to make the symptoms better. And so I didn't want to lose this on the track. And so that's why I'm also doing the psychotherapy training at the moment. And this brought me to the hospital of the Federal Armed Forces. And I found this especially interesting because you usually don't have any connections, at least I don't, to the military. We spend so much money every year into this, and you don't know what's really happening inside. And I wanted to have a look and kind of get this opportunity to have a look. But also, and maybe the more important reason was many people, especially with traumatized from war, they suffer greatly from this. And so it's sometimes really tough and heartbreaking to see, but it's such a positive feeling to see, okay, these symptoms actually get better and one can actually do something about it. And you have this more or less immediate positive effects that are really, which brings you a great feeling. So even after the time course of a few weeks, you can see how patients feel better and the symptoms get better. And that's was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this there. And especially these are the cases that they're usually not confronted with. And so
Mm.
especially during the time of training, it is good to have yeah, very intense and extreme cases when they are paired with great supervisions, which I thankfully have at the Federal Armed Forces Hospital.
Yeah, that's it's such an important line of work.
Mm.
It's fascinating. So I don't know if we ever spoke about that, but my mom is actually a therapist,
Mhm.
and so maybe for the chat here, Tim and I got to know each other a few years ago on a summer school for cognitive scientists. So we've been like. Going back and forth, meeting every now and then, also often on that summer school because it's yearly. But yeah, it's very interesting. So I always felt like there's a great connection because of this passion for helping people. And I'm not doing that, plain and simple. I don't think I would have the strength. I deeply admire the work that you're doing, and I think it's extremely important. And it's so sad and so problematic for society that it's unfortunately still stigmatized in some sense. Like it's still difficult to talk about it if people are going to therapy or they feel the need to go to therapy, even if they don't go. Um, so it's a small audience I have here, but I would still like to really say very clearly that if you feel like you're struggling, there's always help available in some way, shape, or form. Try to reach out. It's always possible. Yeah. Now I
Yeah,
hope
that's a
that.
really important
Yeah,
point that you're
yeah,
saying there, and especially what I also noticed in the army, there are still certain concepts and also this concept of like let's say manliness in
mm,
man is quite still it's still there to yeah, you shouldn't show when you are in trouble, and this is a sign of weakness. And you know, this toxic masculinity in
yeah,
some of the patients is really, really a big thing. And I sometimes notice also when they talk about these experiences they had that are sometimes many, many years in the past, that they basically say, well, you're the first person I'm actually talking to about this. So because they didn't wanted to show any weaknesses, and around these comrades they didn't wanted to show it. And also yeah, with the families, they didn't want to trouble them. And so this leads to the thing that they sometimes building this shell around them and
mm,
don't let these emotions get there anymore. And also, especially this concept of, you know, what is a weakness, and not sharing it is really, really an important point. What was also important for me, and there's a lot of things still to do, but we're on the right track. And so only recently also these whole concepts of PTBS and PTSD, and offering help immediately, or also when you after your employment, that you get these seminars where you are encouraged to talk about your issues that you have, and possibly traumatic events that happened. And so this hasn't been done until kind of recently.
mm. Yeah, yeah, but at least it's starting, right? It's starting that there's a trajectory now. Yeah, it's great. So, so in your research, you are also already working with clinical population, right? And you were
These days
working
with my
with,
research,
yeah,
not with military personnel.
yeah,
So these days, since I'm doing the therapy full time,
mm,
yeah, and I don't actually at this moment have a research contract. This is more like a really time-intensive hobby these days to
mm,
continue these projects, to trying to get money and funds to continue this research, to get to cover the fees for the publications
mm,
and all these things. So these days it's still mainly with patients with schizophrenia,
mm.
and also
That's the
more with
research now,
neuroscience
not the
things.
therapy work.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So these days I'm not doing this research in military
Mm,
personnel yet. So this could be an option for the future, but for that I first have to get several other grants
mm.
that allow me to do that research.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think there's some space or some room to talk about mental health in academia here as well, because I think and so I was fortunate enough to have um, a full-time job position that went for 5 years, but that's extremely lucky and very uncommon in Germany. And you were not, to put quite clearly. So your research has suffered from exactly that system, that academic system. And I don't
Exactly.
want to put you in any weird spot here, so just whatever you feel comfortable with. But this, I think, this is really something that's worth to talk about in academia. The struggle that
Mm.
young early career researchers have to find funding and find their spot, and be dependent on supervisors, and sometimes weird or unjustified efforts that they have to make or something like that. Um, so yeah, you are not done with your PhD, but you're also already working.
Mhm.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how you experience the academic field and whether you actually would still continue to be in that field.
Mhm.
Even given the opportunity, maybe you would now be of the opinion that it's better to walk away and do something else
Mhm.
instead, right? So maybe you can comment on that if you want.
Yeah, I actually, since you said if I'm willing to walk away, I met many people who decided then after the PhD, no, that's not the system I want to be in anymore, or quitting the PhD also, because from the whole yeah environment, it's not really supportive and rewarding. So it can be highly rewarding, and I find it really rewarding to do a lot of research, to get paid basically to read and to think and to have new things, put your ideas into cool concepts and share it with the academic community. So this is one of the great things of science. However, for example, the payment is not great. So also depending on the discipline. So for me as a psychologist, but also with such sociologist or so, it's not really great. So usually you get 50 to 65% contracts for 100% work. But let's be honest, it's rarely 100% work. It's usually more than 40 hours a week, 40 hours a week. But you still only get paid for half the time. However, this is different when you're, for example, in the field of informatics or robotics, usually. And so sometimes the people get for the same work the double amount of money. Yeah, which can lead to certain problems also between people. Yeah, when you're sitting together writing a paper, you're in the same position. Both are PhD students, for example, and this one person gets
Mm.
paid 100% more money for the same work. So this is not a great start. Also, depending on the discipline, so data science, for example, and mathematics is much more on vogue, and also industry has a much bigger interest in this regard. And this is a little bit more tricky when you're in psychology, and especially when you do this really basic and really basal research. Um, and yeah, so that's why many contracts don't even go for an extended period of time. So I think an average PhD takes around 5 years, and I only had three
Mm.
to finish it. To Corona, I was able to get a 1 year extension, or again 65%, but after that, that's done. But again, my whole research that was originally planned, at least, it's still going on. I still have to do this, invest a lot of time. Also, the review processes take a lot of time. And so this is all happening unpaid.
Yeah.
And so you have to, yeah, deal with a lot of these things. It's a lot of emotional pressure also. And I know many people who have to work aside of this. And so for me, for example, this is the case. It's not better than in the Ausbildung for the psychotherapy, for example, where you get also on average for this whole um, 42 hours, you get 1,000 euro brutto from
Before
the
tax.
insurance companies, yeah, which with which you have to pay your whole Ausbildung and your whole training for this. So
Mm.
you're left up with nothing.
Mm.
Then you have this time-intensive hobby of doing research where you get nothing at all
Mm.
also, and so that's why you have to also sometimes see where you can get other money from to work in bars, or I'm doing lectures, for example, a lot. And so this ends up that I have now with fixed times, like the time that I'm working adds up to 63 hours a week, which yeah is not great as you can imagine. And since psychologists usually always talk about the proper work-life balance, yeah, but they can't sustain it themselves because the system doesn't allow it to be,
Mm.
because you don't easily get these science contracts, and they take a lot of time also. This can be really frustrating. Yeah. Another thing is a imposter syndrome, and
Yes.
the imposter syndrome is also really important thing that many students have to face over the course of time during the PhD.
Mm-hmm.
which is yeah basically that you feel like yeah am I in the right place here right now, and there are other people who are maybe much smarter than and I'm just faking it, and these people they have so much more experience,
Yeah.
they publish so much more papers, and I'm an imposter, and so this is what's hitting many different people, and which is extremely common, especially in the context of science.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually that no one is free from this. Even professors who are like established in the field and have clearly proven their academic success and so on. But everyone is, I think that's kind of comes with the profession, right? You're always doubting yourself because that's literally your job, to doubt yourself or to doubt in general, right? Um, but then you also have this other side where in academia you have to be extremely confident. You have to be able to push through lots of uncertainty, and I think that creates a lot of tension, yeah, with many people, understandably so, yeah.
Yeah, very much. And I mean, you always start to compare yourself with others when you're at these conferences. You see a lot of professors, PhDs, and so on. And
Yeah.
so it's always the more higher you get, the more you compare yourself, and you're always kind of rather lower. But what I also noticed, especially when I started teaching, so there are also students from the bachelor's and the master's. And throughout this time, I noticed, wait, you actually learned a lot throughout this whole quest of the past 10 years about psychology,
Yeah.
because it's all a matter of the reference system, right? And when you're around in research, then most of the people have a Master of Science, many have a PhD, some are professors. And so you rarely talk about with freshmen that just started their basic training in psychology, for example.
Yeah.
And after a while, you notice, well, you know actually a lot. There are a lot of concepts. There are many things that you can also teach to the younger generation. And this realization that it's all a matter of a reference system, that you kind of always develop yourself with the reference system, was really helpful to see, wait, I actually made it quite fast on the path yet,
Yeah.
even though there are many failures, many hardships as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting. This like once you put yourself in the right mindset, everything seems to fall into place very easily. But then like it's hard to maintain that.
Yeah.
At least I personally find that. Yeah, I know. Like if I have a good day, then everything is fine, and I feel like yes, I deserve that, and I know that what I'm doing is interesting to people, not only to myself. And then there are other days where it's not that easy to maintain this, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but before we drift off into this kind of personal stories only, I would really like to hear more about what you actually did in your VR research, right? Because this is a
Mhm.
channel about VR related research, and especially with the focus on using physiological data. So you
Mhm.
were using physiological data, not only were you using the data, but you were actually creating the tool that measures it. And I think that's a fantastic application of what we want to do in VR, and why VR is such a great tool for this kind of applications. And I'm really keen on hearing some more details, and I hope the chat is too.
Yes, sure. Yes, so building up onto this research as a rubber hand illusion, we all moved the thing to VR so that you can actually have this rubber hand illusion in virtual reality. And I said that many patients with schizophrenia, but also borderline personality disorders, is the working assumption, have problems with their own self and their own experience of their body. So it's a sense of self, but also the sense of agency is altered. So sometimes they don't feel like, okay, this is my body, this is me who's moving it, or these ideas, these are not even my thoughts. Yeah, so these are from somewhere external and they're not internally produced. Yeah, and we wanted to have a look at these um, interesting phenomenological experiences. So, and what an idea was, there was some research before that from Keisuke Suzuki actually, who used an EEG, an ECG interface to virtual reality. And I found this extremely nice because I think there are many, many different applications for this. So in this regard, I developed an ECG device that is able to have serial communication with programs like Unity that you can use for the virtual reality paradigms. And it was quite interesting for me to see because this whole interoception research and heart rate variability research, there's many studies are being done, but there's at this time when I had a look in around 2019, there was nothing like this where you can plug something in and have this actual interface. So these ECG machines usually cost several 10,000s of euros. They don't have an interface. They sometimes write the signal on an analog basis, but not a digital one. So I took it upon myself to develop something like this and to make an interface for VR. So whenever heartbeats are detected, that you can send a trigger, and these triggers can be can be picked up by the VR system. And in my case specifically, so you could see your body in VR when you're looking down, wearing these goggles. Yeah, and you can move your fingers, a camera in the front is recording it and translating this into real time into your own virtual fingers. Yeah, and when you're connected with an ECG device, these fingers and your whole body basically glows in red. So always in synchrony with your own heartbeat. And so the idea was basically to get these heartbeats, these interoceptive signals, is also believed to be worse in patients with schizophrenia, and kind of show it to them. So this interoceptive signal to display this exoceptively, and that you get this visual input. So basically using a whole different modality for the heartbeat, something that you usually cannot perceive to make it perceivable by looking at it, looking at your body, and to increase the sense of ownership, which could also path the way to more therapies that relate more to the grounding of patients and to improve the sense of ownership that patients feel over their own body.
Great, yeah, and I think so. Just very briefly, interoception and exteroception. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so basically you have some internal signals that you usually don't access with your other senses like hearing or seeing, and everything that you have externally, like a microphone that is here, a book, or something like that, you can see, you can actually perceive with the other senses. And I found it quite interesting to pick up these senses from your own body. That you might have problems with, and to show them to you extroceptively and have a look at this. When you have a look at this, do you detect it as belonging to yourself? Yeah, does this belong to me
Mm-hmm.
or is this not me? Yeah, and so this is what I measured and wanted to investigate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always had this idea that even just displaying the heart rate in a virtual reality game would already be interesting to the players. So
Absolutely.
um,
Mm.
maybe in your research where you did that, right? You took the heart rate and you displayed it, and you had it shifting time wise a little bit back and forth. But what did people tell you? I think you did it once with a healthy population and also with a clinic population, right?
Yes, yeah, with patients with schizophrenia and
Yeah.
healthy
Yeah.
participants, yes.
So with the healthy participants, what did they feel about this? Like, what did they think about this whole concept of seeing their bodies in a new way, in a new light,
Mm.
using this
Mm.
virtual reality applications? What was their reaction to it?
There were many different reactions, depending also on your experience with virtual reality, but many were like shocked what they could see, what they could do.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were seeing their own hands and seeing them move, and then suddenly they also start blinking and they actually had an increased sense of ownership and really felt like, okay, this is me. I can control these hands. I have ownership over this. I have also agency over it. I can control certain actions. And they found it really interesting to see this flickering of their own hands. Also, somewhere looking, okay, yeah, is this my heartbeat? Okay, yeah, I can feel my heartbeat and see it at the same time, and found this really, really interesting and asked if there are some games that can that use this. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, there's a whole variety of how you can use these things like neurofeedback and especially your interoception
Mm-hmm.
for these things. And just even seeing it, it can help to make you more aware of your own heartbeat and how it can be, how it changes, for example. And
Yeah.
if you think also of other applications when you do certain interfaces that then control also the computer program, you can do horror games more immersive even and more adaptive to depending how much distress you are, how much your heart is pumping,
Yeah.
basically, and this opens up a whole new avenue also for this new immersive game experience,
Mm-hmm.
which I really love about these ideas. So to use your own body signals and you interact with such an interesting way
Yeah.
to a normally static video game.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I fully agree with that. This idea of your body being the interface is the whole concept that I try to drive home in some sense. And I really think that also the heart rate alone is. I think really think that even just seeing the heart rate, depending on the
Yes.
game, right? If you're playing a magical game, so I had one demo application in the beginning where I had particles flowing out of my hand and they were forming a ball, and then I could throw that ball with a single hand. Anyways, it was an earlier version of a thing that's also now our demo application, and I had a simulated heartbeat. I just put it to 1 beat per second, and I had a simulated heartbeat of this ball of particles in the palm of my hand, and just seeing it made me feel more powerful, even though I knew, like I myself coded it to be static, like there was no change, and I knew that, but still it felt very very cool.
Yes,
So
that's a very
yeah,
interesting point that you're saying. So even this mere illusion of this can already help.
yeah.
And it turns out this is also something that I learned and that's highly discussed in interoceptive research. People are really, really bad to detect their own heartbeat.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is interesting. It's your own self and it's pumping the whole time, but usually they're not quite aware of this. And to make people much more aware of this can also help to interpret certain body signals. Also, talking about psychiatry, for example, again, yeah, when people have these hypochondric fears, they are going to have a heart attack, for example, or okay, my
Mm-hmm.
heart is racing, I'm not even doing any sports. Why is this? Is this a
Mm-hmm.
panic attack? Is
Mm-hmm.
this, where does it coming from? And to kind of help people to develop a healthier connection to your own body, to reconnect to your body, to ground you more into it, to notice, okay, this is my feedback, and I'm doing this action right now. I'm sitting, so my heartbeat should be slower. When I'm going the stairs, it's higher. When I'm seeing a creepy person in the U8 in Berlin, the heartbeat also increases. So
Yeah.
you get this better feedback system to your own self, which I believe can also help and aid strongly to, yeah, possible therapies to a better understanding of your own self and your own body.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And considering the applications, uh, if you talk about a horror game, have you ever played horror games in VR, like real horror games?
Yes, I did. Yes, yeah.
Which one?
And yeah, I mean, I played several horror games, but the one that I liked most, it's not quite in a horror game, but Half-Life Alyx
Mm.
is fantastic because um, I played Westworld, for example, where you also have to hide from yeah, people who chase you with an axe, basically, and this was intense. However, I noticed the more immersive it is, the more realistic everything is, the more you can interact with your surrounding and touch and grab everything, the more you feel connected and like being into this game. And even though from this whole story and what's happening, Half-Life Alyx is less scary from the idea compared to Westworld, it was still much, much more scarier. And so that's what I really enjoyed. So when there are also these zombies, for example, walking around and you have to do all this fighting and to really immersively be in the situation, this was for me the best and the most intense experience, which I also most enjoyed.
Yeah, Half-Life Alyx is pretty cool. I must admit I haven't even played it through because of that. Because so Half-Life Alyx is a fantastic game, and I always think like I'm saving it for some days when I'm not like completely stressed out already. And that hasn't happened since I got the game.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, but it's really intense. I once played Phasmophobia in VR. Do you know
Mhm.
Phasmophobia? I do not have a desire to have a game to be more adaptive, to be more creepy, I must tell you.
Yeah, with
Like,
Phasmophobia, that is next level. Yes, that's true.
it's so intense. I mean,
Yeah.
I experienced everything already in VR. I died 1,000 times. I have no problem falling from buildings and whatever. Like everything is fine, but this thing that scares me.
Yeah, but it's interesting, even though you know it's not real, but it kind of feels real and how you can interact with certain things.
Yeah,
You get the illusion of it, even though it's not even your own ownership, for
yeah, yeah.
example, right? Your heart rate, just the simulated heart rate, it's still the illusion of it,
Mm.
and it feels real, and
Yeah,
it
it
feels
also
still
has
more
this.
immersive.
It has this thing where like it does these very immersive things like spatialized audio where it feels like someone is breathing down your neck, like a
Hmm.
ghost
Hmm.
spirit thing, and then at some point there was a heartbeat coming, like not mine obviously, but there was a heartbeat coming, and that you as a gamer you always know if there's a heartbeat coming, you know
Hmm.
you've done
Yeah.
fucked up. Yeah, something's
Yes.
going to happen right away, and you are dying, and you don't know why, and you're panicking, and then you turn around and something jumps in your face, and you're just
Hmm.
losing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think it's definitely something like something that you can do with heartbeats. But it's I'm not entirely sure if I personally would play that game because I already get scared so easily in VR because VR is so
Mm.
immersive by itself, by its own nature. I don't want it to be more scary.
I see, yeah.
Yeah.
But I
But
mean, there are other great and useful applications, for example, also if you think about neurofeedback and again having different psychiatric disorders where you can really control your own body and to self-regulate with more immersive surroundings and more
mm,
immersive environments. And also when you think about psychiatry again, you have a social phobia, for example, yeah, or you're afraid to give talks or something like that, yeah, then you can yeah, wear this cap and simulate the situation. You can also adapt it to, yeah, how much the people are friendly or unfriendly or
hmm
giving you comments. So something that you can't even do in this real world. Yeah,
yeah,
and you at the same time measure your heartbeat and you get some feedback to this. Or a classic is exposure therapy. So you do exposure, you bring these people in these fearful situations, and after a while it actually has to think, so your whole body, your whole system cannot sustain it for a prolonged period of time,
yeah,
and then it gets better and better, and having this feedback also in VR or in any other sort could be extremely helpful.
yeah.
And I think that would be also some other like great applications where you can use VR and especially this biofeedback. This is actually also something we at the moment work on.
Okay, great.
Mm.
So if you want to use this VR, I think that's also something that someone asked in the chat, Bogarter, how easily can you fool someone in thinking another heartbeat is their own? Who is best able to avoid be tricked? So that has two questions, right? The one is assuming that you're using the real heartbeat, right, with a real
Mm-hmm.
ECG, um, how real does it have to be? So how big can the delay be until it doesn't feel like your own heartbeat anymore? And I think that's the second question. Like how can you how can you feel so? How can you avoid to be tricked in this case by another heartbeat? So that's really interesting. Did you do that
Mm-hmm.
ever? Someone else's heartbeat to be displayed as your own.
Mm.
That's a
I,
fascinating idea. I
I,
never thought about
yeah.
that. Yeah.
I actually had some thoughts that went into this direction. Um, my latter idea was to do it, for example, with a couple, to see, of the different heartbeats and how they kind of relate and how they change depending on the interaction. And if it could be also more bonding, if you, for example, hear and see this virtual heartbeat of your spouse, for example. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and so this was also an idea that I had before. And also with some colleagues from Vienna, we were thinking about they do a lot of infant research to kind of combine this and have a look at these synchronies also in the heartbeats of the mother and the child,
Mm-hmm.
how this changes over time with a mother-child interaction. So this is actually something we are interested and aiming to do some research about. The other question, how much time does it need? It's an interesting question. So there are some studies, and they say there is a really significant cut at around 240 milliseconds
Mm-hmm.
that's happening. So after 240 milliseconds delay, it is tricky, and you rarely detect it as your own anymore. And yeah, that's why you are in need to do it really online, and you should not lose a lot of time.
Mm.
So with
And how much
our
jitter? So delay is one thing, but you also have the precision, right? So what if it's one time it's just 100 and the next time it's
I see.
50 and then it's maybe 200 or something like that. Like
Mm.
how much jitter can this survive to
Mm.
keep up the illusion?
I don't know the exact values, but it's really high. So
Mm.
also with a lot of jitter,
Mm.
you are quite easily fooled that this is your own heartbeat. This
Mm-hmm.
is actually also something we do to test the interoceptive sensitivity,
Mm-hmm.
which means so how sensitive are you to your whole interoceptive system to start with?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so what we are doing prior to the VR experiments actually, so we connect this to the computer and at first place the real heartbeat. But then there are also some cases where we play these sounds 30% faster and 30% slower compared to the actual heart rate.
Like
Yeah.
30% earlier or with a delay.
Uh,
Or really
um,
faster or just with the delay that you're shifting?
Faster. So
Oh,
there are
okay.
two different setups. So
Then they will be
let's say
completely
the
out of
delay.
sync.
Yeah, we notice actually when there is this delay, and because people usually don't have this connection to your own heartbeat system, they don't notice it
Mm-hmm.
usually. Yeah, so they don't notice it if this is my heartbeat right now or if it's delayed by 5 milliseconds. It's what we actually do in VR. So when the hand is blinking, some of the trials are in real time, and some are delayed by 500 milliseconds.
Mm-hmm.
And so far of the data that we have, there's no difference.
Okay.
So
So
people
it's not the
cannot
240
notice.
milliseconds. In VR, it's more forgiving.
No, depends. So if you know about, for example, if you measure your own heartbeat and then it's only happening later, you can there's still a certain window until
Mm.
which you say, okay, yeah, it's beeping in my frequency. Yeah, and this is around this time where it gets significantly worse
Mm-hmm.
after 240 milliseconds when there's too much delay
Mm-hmm.
of this. Yeah. But only when you know this is your heartbeat right
Mm-hmm.
now.
No. It's difficult to
Another
feel it,
thing is
right?
if you don't have any other signal of this, and when you're sitting still and you don't hear it, you don't feel it, nothing, then you're extremely easily fooled into the delay of your own heartbeat,
Mm-hmm.
which puzzles many interoceptive scientists a lot.
Wait,
And so what
so
we,
if you don't
yeah.
have any other influence, like any other stimulation, which would in theory allow you to listen to your own heartbeat very easily, right? Then you are easier fooled?
No, it's when you don't have any sort of feedback
Mm-hmm.
of your own heart, and then you hear some beeping,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to say, okay, this is my heartbeat,
Mm-hmm.
yes or no, then you're easily fooled.
Okay.
Yeah. However, when you, for example, did sports before,
Yeah.
yeah, and you're connected to an ECG, and then you hear your heartbeat pumping, it actually allows for some amount of time of a delay until you hear a sound, and so you
Mm.
still identify it as your own heartbeat
Mm.
and being closely connected in time, temporarily, that you still say, okay, this belongs to me, and this
Mm.
is my heartbeat right now.
Mm.
That's why,
It's
because it's
good
so
news
tricky,
for
we did
gaming. Yeah.
a different concept. Yeah, we did a different concept where we actually place the sound 30% faster and 30% slower compared to the actual heartbeat. Then people had to decide, is this my heart right now, or is this faster or slower? Yeah, and even there, people are really bad at detecting this. Yeah, a patient with schizophrenia likely even more so, but even healthy participants, they are really, really bad in this, and so it's interesting. This is something that happens your whole life, so thousands times a day, but you don't have this access to that. Yeah.
Do you think there is some sort of danger if we are, let's say we play a game or we create a game where we are using rather inaccurate, low grade ECG. So either we are using, for example, the Muse, which has a PPG sensor here at the top,
Hmm.
which is absolutely horrible when you move. It's way worse than using than the EEG. Like the motion artifacts of the PPG are horrible. Just in case you were wondering.
Hmm.
But then we have these sports chest belts, right, for 80 euros, and you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that if you were somewhere else, obviously, because you have to um, get stuff under your clothes, right? But if you're at home and you are really looking for the most immersive experience, it's very easily imaginable that someone says like, well, whatever, these 80 bucks, and I have a chest strap from sports laying around anyway, so I'm just using that
Hmm.
and play a game. But that's going to come with a big delay. Like for example, this Polar chest strap, it has a delay of 600 milliseconds, and then it sends the packages in packages of 600 milliseconds. So
Hmm.
you have a varying delay. It's not great to work with in real time. It's fine to work with it as a post hoc analysis, but in real time you always have to do this thing where you are projecting the heartbeat to the future, from the last 2 or 3 beats, for example.
Hmm.
You kind of have to estimate something similar to what you told me about a few years ago, before you created your own device because of that reason.
Hmm.
But if you want to really work with that and play with like create games with that, and we have this inaccurate heartbeat, right, which has a delay with it, which has a
Exactly.
jitter, and we create this thing, and then we have a game where, for example, the game becomes more easy if your heartbeat lowers. Um,
Hmm.
because that it's like it's trying to encourage you to de-stress essentially, right, in some way. um,
Hmm.
do you think there's a potential danger, like physical danger or mental danger or something that we should be wary of when we try to create these kind of games? Something that I should know of, or anything that you know?
I think in general, it's this whole immersivity, we have to have a watch that they are not too traumatizing, these things, right? These
Mm.
these video games, for example. But un unless that's not outside of these boundaries, I do not see many issues with that. So
Mm.
I think it's best to progress slowly, and also this progress is slow. We develop it further and further and further, and look where it goes. And actually, having this more adaptability and more flexibility can actually be a really positive thing on your own body and your own self, because it makes you think more about what is possible with your body. It
Mm.
can relate you more to a closer connectedness with yourself. So I don't see any major risk there unless you do it in really intense bunches.
Mm-hmm.
And so first we are in the stage where we have a look at this and investigate what significant differences do we have. and what influences can it have. And yes, we know that depending what you, for example, see, it can actually also influence your own heartbeat, so that you do an adaptation towards
Right.
this. And yes, you could possibly think about certain risks that are involved, but we are not at any time yet where this is a major concern.
I've heard. Do you know Stephen Fairclough? He's a EEG researcher in the UK,
Hmm.
also doing BCI stuff.
Hmm.
And he once told me, I was there for a conference and we were just chatting about gaming because I was always interested in gaming,
Hmm.
and he told me they had some prototype where they were using heart rate for exactly that. Like it was a similar, like very easy thing, like I think Tetris or something similar, a very simple game which is easy to create for a researcher, and they made it slower, so they made it easier if your heart rate was slower,
Hmm.
and that led to people fainting
Hmm.
because they stopped breathing.
Hmm. 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 Okay,
And he
yeah.
told me like, don't do that.
Hmm.
It makes people faint. And
Hmm.
I really didn't think that would happen, but I can totally see that, right? Imagine if you're
Hmm.
playing a horror game where your literal life depends on your heartbeat to be lower, like heart rate to
Hmm.
be low. For example, if you think about you have to escape a dungeon and there's monsters everywhere and they are blind but they can smell your fear, they can hear your heart beating, right?
Hmm.
And then obviously you want to have your heartbeat lower because it decreases the chance that you're hurt and you can escape safely. And then you're very much incentivized to keep your
Hmm.
heartbeat low. And that could very much also lead to this problem. That's very interesting to think about that. But then again, it is immersive. Like, as
Yes.
if that was true, like if this situation was true, you would also try to do that. You would really try to breathe very slowly and manipulate your body so
Hmm.
that it does what you want and not what it would do naturally in some sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what neurofeedback is doing. So,
Mm.
depending on what you're happening, what you experience, what you're doing there on the screen, what you can manipulate by your brain power, by your vegetative system, this can influence it on the long run. So, this is exactly what we do in patients with ADHD, for
Mm.
example, when they have to control uh, animal on airplane or so to go up, to go down, and so of course this influences how active you are or how lowered you are. And yeah, that's what I mean. So don't we shouldn't do this in like extreme bunches and directly use it into VR settings of horror games and use it on a big scale. But in the scientific context, it's really controlled. It's a
Mm.
controlled environment. We have really, really high also ethical standards that we have a look at this. We are using theories, certain theories, and try to prove them or not. And especially when we see these feedback loops and see, what's happening there, what is actually happening, then you can also take a slower back and see what influences it has. And I think we should always go with science and actual experiments that show how safe these technologies are.
Mm.
And then I'm not concerned because the way science progresses is in Germany very much restricted and adhering to like strong ethical and medical guidelines where there are also always professionals there. And you always tell these people, when you have these motion sickness, you feel something, stop this experiment at any time. And so this is a perfect and great control setting for these things to happen, to find out more things and know what we should or should not use and entail into video games and
Mm.
VR. Yeah.
I really want to talk with you about neurofeedback
Mhm.
later. And there's also a question in the chat. So, EG dude, I haven't forgotten you. But I just want to very briefly comment on that because one line of my research is that I want to democratize the whole use of physiological data. So I'm creating
Mhm.
software that lets other people use it in their like Unity applications or whatever. So at some point I
Yeah.
will definitely use control over what people are doing. And that's a very slippery slope, as you said. Like normally in
Yes.
science, everything's very well controlled, and you have like you progress slowly. But then again, I think that is also a big issue of why this physiological data hasn't made it to market yet. So there are no games like that, because the scientific domain has kind of gate kept the progress, and everyone, because and for a good reason too, right? I'm not saying that this was bad, but in some way, right, since it concerns the body or the mind, the brain, or whatever, since it concerns that, at some point, like science is always like, no, stop, you shouldn't progress too fast, and you should tread safely. And then you have these ugly prototypes of applications that are like not catchy at all, and you're trying to get some scientific evidence in favor or against or whatever, trying to understand what's happening there. But then the question is really like, how close like can science get to a real game? Like how close can scientists come in their very much non-gamified world to create experiments that are good enough and immersive enough that they really give us this information of what happens really if you're using that with a game, like what happens to the real players out there. And how can we make sure that it's not at some point Meta just swoops in and just does it, because they can. And we're like, hey, let's slow down for a bit, and they're just like, stop me.
Also, games can be used for actual science purpose, and I know, for example, we in the military armed forces hospitals, there are many studies who actually entailed Tetris as a form of therapy. So after trauma therapy, these people are always advised to play Tetris for 20 minutes. Yeah, because it actually has this really interesting effect. So you kind of have a look into this trauma, and the idea is to reconnect it to other things, to kind of quite figuratively turn it around, reconnect it, and it actually showed really strong effects on this. So they had to control a population with different intrusive thoughts from this trauma, and this one group that were playing Tetris in this intervention group had on average one after this training episode, one of the median level of one intrusion per week, and the other group who didn't do it had 10 as a median.
Wow,
And so this was quite a
that's
strong
a
effect,
huge
and
effect
so there are
size.
many interesting studies, and so this was actually something we also talked about today. So that this is actually something we should always advise. So always when you come with an acute trauma reaction, you should actually play an hour of Tetris, and also after these sessions of doing trauma therapy, also playing Tetris, because it showed it has very strong effects to the reconnection of a trauma, so to say, into your real world and to the existing things, if you wish. So that was kind of this long excursion to what I want to say. So long story short, I think you can also use games for the scientific progress. So it doesn't exclude each other. So there's also research that uses Tetris. You can also use other video games, also other VR games for certain interventions and see how it looks like. So I think it's not exclusive. It can go hand in hand. But I am more in favor of having these scientific ideas, especially when there are certain things of playing with your heart rate, body rate, etc. So that you do it in a controlled setting to see really what you're doing, especially when we talk about possible adverse side effects of fainting, etc. And I mean, similar things you can have with horror movies. Yeah, when horror movies were first made, and they can increase also the heart rate, and they have also influence on yourself, right? And I don't think it includes themselves so much. And to use science to develop better video games, but also use video games to improve the progress on science, would be a perfect approach.
And that is the perfect segue to neurofeedback.
Yeah.
Because I think that is really where the two domains are like coming together. But before, I would like to entertain the question of EEG dude. Um,
Mhm.
so I'm just gonna read it out loud here. Have you thought about adding EEG in the mix? This way, you can analyze cardiosynchronous activity, which is time locked to R peaks, and also look at the evoked activity to the heartbeats that you display to the subjects. Before you answer, that's a very so I can clearly tell that EEG dude is within the research community, right? So we have to untangle a few of these like parts of this terminology here. So EEG, electroencephalography. So that's electrical activity from the brain that we measure with electrodes. That's also what I specialized in. So we are trying to measure from the brain here. And cardiosynchronous activity, time locked to the R peak. The R peak is the time of when the big part of the heart is contracting, right? And then time locked activity would be like what happens in the brain directly after such a heartbeat activity. And and then what does this evoked activity, so this brain activity, time locked to the heartbeat, what does it look like in the different subjects? So it's a very complex question, and I think have you done something like that? Heartbeat evoked potentials in your.
Yes, I did, but in a different context. So, first of all, the question, yes, I thought about this idea, and that's a great, great combination. So I see a lot of potential also to use EEG to start with, combined to with all the different other aspects of, for example, prefrontal alpha activity, theta activity, in which state you are, and how much. Of a Zen state you are, for example. So that can be extremely helpful. The problem is, so to do this also in real time with the current techniques, these EEG machines are extremely expensive, and it's a lot of effort to DIY this also for you. And so this is a big project, and I don't have the time and the financial
Hmm.
resources to do so, but it would be extremely interesting.
Hmm.
What we actually did with EEG at one point was in a driving simulator, and participants were driving. It was an extremely boring task. You had to drive in on a highway for 1.5 hours and always have to brake because there was a traffic jam. Yeah, and these people were connected to an EEG cab. Yeah, and it was always measuring the signal, and it was designed so that it would get boring, so you would have a lot of beta activity in your EEG signal. And then at the same time, they also had DACS and TDCS
It's,
electrodes on the
this
backside of the
is
head.
electrical stimulation, transcranial direct current stimulation. So it sounds dangerous, but it actually isn't because you're using low voltage. So you just patch an electricity electrode one end and the other end of your head, and you send some current through the brain, which is fine, surprisingly fine.
Yes.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, so it is the case you measure your brain signals, so alpha waves, beta waves with different frequencies. And so my supervisor back then, he said basically these your brain is also just an oscillator. So when you put a different oscillator there, you can force your brain to have waves in a certain frequency. So for example, you can put this device there, and it gives this electrical input, and then your brain waves also adjust to this frequency. Yeah, and so you can basically force your brain out of these beta frequencies or these frequencies that are correlated with being tired, and make you more activated when you put in a different frequency, a higher or lower frequency. And we were interested in this few second sleep. Yeah, so when people slowly
Doze
fall
off.
asleep and getting inattentive. And then basically when this cap was connected to the stimulator, and whenever the cap detected this, the stimulator gave the signal to
Hmm.
not allow these people to get into this mood or to get into the second sleep. And it's quite interesting. These people don't even notice that they're stimulated. So it's a safe technique. But it turned out actually, when the cap notices you are in this second sleep or too tired, your brain can be basically forced to be more active, and that could help also with driving, for example. So to have less accidents on the road, which is a really, really frequent problem that you have on long time lorry ride, for example.
Mm.
And so these could be some uses of neurofeedback, and this is something where I use this actually and this EEG neurofeedback for scientific purposes.
Mm. Great. Yeah, really cool. I'm thinking like in this case, it might be useful to combine two different modalities. So,
Exactly.
for example, use eye tracking in order to detect the sleepiness of the participant or the driver or the operator of any safety critical environment. And then just have a very simple, I don't know, a baseball cap, which has this TDCS thing implemented. Because detecting EEG is always very difficult in a real world environment. But detecting sleepiness with an eye tracker, I think that's quite possible. Um,
Exactly, and you can
so,
think about also other techniques. Also, if you, for example, have your heart rate data, so when you're
yeah.
more sleepy, more tired, it goes down. Also, your blood pressure. So this can all give you certain information
Mm,
about the current state you're in. So this could be there could be many many different useful links that you can do. And I think what I really want the future to be that this is easy to access. That these are not costing several thousands of euros, are hard to use. You have to be an
mm,
expert to use them, you have to be knowledgeable in informatics. And so it's really approached to make it cheap and accessible and easy to use for many. And then this could lead to many, many different positive developments. And people can say, yeah, I find this is a really important and interesting and thing that I want to work on.
mm.
Yeah. And so that these pathways are provided for other people.
Absolutely, yeah. And now, if we're already talking about real world applications, now we can segue back to the neurofeedback part. Because I think there's great potential there. Obviously, the real virtual magic Skyrim mod, which you know about, and I hope the viewers also know about, is is some sort of neurofeedback application, right? So just very briefly put, we are using the Muse, right? This very cheap and easy to use EEG, and we measure some sort of mental focus, which is mostly based on non-EEG measures like movement or eye movement, but also on EEG. And we feed it back to the game Skyrim, where your magical power is increased if you have a higher mental focus. And you have worked with neurofeedback, right? If I remember correctly, I think during your masters, right? Or
Yes, and also when I was working at
yeah.
students' assistants, and yeah.
Yeah, so that's fantastic experience that you have there, and maybe you can talk me through what neurofeedback is, or like how you used it, and maybe also how it is still used in therapy today. I don't know actually if it is a legit thing to do, or we scientists just drive it like without any real grounding in therapeutical applications. And also, most importantly, I think what holds it back. So, if it is
Hmm.
legit, what prevents neurofeedback from being used in real life or in therapeutic contexts?
Yeah, I can share some other experience that I had also working as a psychiatry with patients with ADHD. So
Mm.
adults with ADHD, and so we usually give a lot of medication also to tackle these issues. But another technique is neurofeedback, and so there's a lot of research being done that's showing the effectiveness. Some studies actually show, yeah, it's not better than other methods, and so there's some discussion about it. And yeah, so that's what we're doing. And so the basic idea is you have this cap of the EEG cap, and then you can steer a bird or an airplane or something like this through different circles that are higher up and lower down. And you have to be really relaxed to go to the lower circles and more in the mode of like being activated to get to the higher circles. And the cap is noticing this by the aforementioned brain waves. And what is really interesting about this, so the first few trials, they try it out and do this. and then they usually manage to do so quite easily. And they usually cannot mention what they are even doing. They just see that it's happening and seeing
Hmm.
that it works. So and so they do this a lot to go through the circles, the lower circles, the upper circles. And with a lot of training, you get better and better and better, and you have these small gamification elements that makes it more rewarding also. And the idea is to take this and apply it into the real world, obviously. And so by doing that, so the idea is to know you're in a high stress level and you want to downregulate yourself. And so you go into this exact mind space that you learned and that you trained in this computer task. Yeah, with these experiments and these paradigms and these values and these results to basically measure and compare against. In our study that we did, we had these sessions of, so they had to do 25 sessions. And setting up an EEG is a lot of work, and you have to do this many, many times, especially in neuroscience.
Hmm.
So many, many trials over and over again. Once you're blinking, you have to get rid of this blinking, and so there are many, many issues involved with that. And the problem is the game was really not the greatest, yeah, to put it that way. So it was really boring. And when you think about you have to do 1 hour of this for 25 sessions, there are a lot of dropout rates. You get less motivated, and this also affects the effectiveness. And so that's one of the big problems. And this to come back to the other thing that we talked about earlier. So it could be helpful to combine it with actually really interesting games that people actually like to play, that are more coming from the gaming industry, for example. And that's another way to link them really, really nicely, what can be really beneficial for science, B, for the gaming industry, but also for the psychological health and treatment options for patients.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's very interesting, right? So I made this Skyrim mod because I found it fun, because I
Mhm.
wanted to have the experience, like this feeling of magic is mine. It's not from the game because I
Mm.
press a button or I level up my character, but the magic is mine, and I can, like,
It's a sort of
yeah,
ownership also.
yeah.
Mm.
So that's why I wanted to create this mod, and it's surely not going to be the last version. But in doing so, I kind of created a meditation experiment through the back door, right? Because that's you have to do that. You have to meditate. You have to focus on your breath. You have to keep calm, even if you're in a stressful situation, and and I can see this becoming a thing as an application that is not meant for neurofeedback, but it still does neurofeedback. Do you think there's something again similar to the heart rate here? Do you think there's something that we should keep in mind that it might have unintended negative consequences for the users, or do you think if we're doing it like creating it in a way that is similar to the neurofeedback, then it can't really do any harm. Worst case, it's boring.
Yeah, well, again, I think these are super important ideas and new ways and approach, and we should have a look at them and push forward with them. But again, in a careful manner, so not everything at once and just producing the
Hmm.
best game whatsoever, but in hand with science and with proper scientific setups. And yes, so there could be certain things when you have your body grounding, for example, or you do these experiments. Okay, you alter this in a certain way, so you're standing somewhere next to your body or someone else, especially with people who are prone to depersonalization, for example.
Hmm.
Yeah, which patients with borderline personality disorder are, for example. This could potentially be a bit problematic when you kind of trick of with your own self. So is this you? Yeah, are there some things modified or altered? And yes, theoretically, there are certain potential things that we should keep in mind, but I don't think there's anything against uh, pursuing this forming proper theories, making sure we stick to the guidelines and to care for medical and psychological safety, and yeah, continue these projects, and then this can actually be really helpful. So I think with many of these things, so there are two sides of this medal, as you want to say it. So many things can be helpful and beneficial for certain patients, but on the other hand, there are certain risks involved. And so doing this kind of slower and careful risk assessment and seeing for which uses it gives the greatest benefits is absolutely something we should pursue. I think there are many big and great potentials for that.
Hmm. Yeah, speaking of which, I think we are already ending the 1.5 hours mark, like closing in on that, and I don't want to take your time too long. I'm just as a side note very happy that there are like continuously around 10 people now watching the stream since already an hour ago. Like maybe they were changing, like not always the same, but it's very cool. So apparently this is interesting to people, which is also great for me to know. I'm happy that you're all here. Like you, the viewers, are the people we're doing this for, right? So that's great. You say there's a lot of potential, and obviously there's also always some risk involved here. Now, if we are taking a step back in this decade of artificial intelligence right now, and of also virtual reality getting ever more relevant, and big companies pushing lots of money into like this technology and so on, and you see Apple coming along with this Vision Pro that is also using eye tracking. Apple has already a patent for using EEG in earphones. There are more and more companies trying out like these more usable EEG options and so on. What do you think about this age of physiology? What do you think interactivity in extended reality can be like 10 years down the line?
Mhm.
And what do you wish for, and what do you find like would be realistic to expect?
Yes.
Because they can be
Yeah.
very different.
hmm Yeah, interesting question. So I want to tackle the first part of this. So again, I feel really these two sides of the medal. Um, and also when you talk about big companies and using also physiological data, these are yours, these are personal, these are to some extent also intimate. Um, and I see at so from the eye of like a data scientist and having all the data, this is absolutely great. How many cool models you can do, model with AI, what can spring out of it with having so much big data. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so from this side of things, it can be yeah, extremely helpful. However, these data is really personal, intimate, and if you, for example, think about what video do you watch and what does it do to your heart rate, there are even already these things where you like watch a certain movie and this eye tracker can look, yeah, where do you actually look at, and so what can we do for marketing? And so I think this is highly critical, and this is a big privacy concern, and so this is the other side of the medal. And so I think, yeah, with these big companies using this data, they should adhere to really big and strong privacy regulations. But knowing big companies, this is likely not going to happen. But that's at least something that I wish for, so that we still can at least decide on our own data, so that they should belong to us. On the other hand, again, using this data can lead to like many important and great avenues. We see this with other AI models or ChatGPT, for example, having a large language models that can create really helpful things that can also aid us for certain aspects. And I really wish to see we are, for example, in education, so that you can give like more immersive experience of like getting into different environments. I can, for example, think about history classes or so that you can actually see these pictures. What was it like? How did it feel like? Yeah, there are even already virtual social interactions. Where people are doing yoga together while being in different rooms, so and on different continents, being in the same virtual environment where you move around with the character, you have this yoga mat you can lay down, so you don't have to travel and have this carbon footprint. Or when something like the corona pandemic hits us,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't even have to leave your room to have these social interactions. And we saw how that could be extremely helpful in things like the corona pandemic. Also, when you think about medical things, so you can do these operations and do a lot of training, or when you're an architect doing certain design things, you can have a look, okay, how would this look like in 3D? You can look around, and so I can think it can be extremely helpful to be creative, to do art, also to do architecture that you also use for industry, and then as well, obviously gaming. So to create more realistic and even more immersive experiences by using your own like physiological data, and as well as for scientific uses to kind of ground people more who have this problem of depersonalization to their own body. And I think these would be, yeah, several places for which VR could be of great use, where I want it to be. And I think it's maybe even better to ask where I do not want to have it, and in which fields this might not be beneficial. So I think there are many, many, many different avenues that we should um, carefully and with proper privacy regulations pursue.
And where do you think physiological data can find a place there in this future of virtual reality? Do you think that there will be a use case, that there will be
Mm.
legitimate reason for people to buy physiological data devices, or do you think
Mm.
that it's ultimately more a research tool and not and won't find its place into the everyday people's hands?
Well, I think and I hope it actually finds its way into everyday people's hands. And this is a matter also of the price. Also, these days, VR headsets are really expensive.
Hmm.
And once we manage to get the price more lower, it's more accessible to many people. And then it also gets increasingly cheap. Um, and I think also when you have these connections, so when also our technology progresses further, that we can have these dry electrodes which are already around that you can put on top, it just automatically, and then you can already access your data. And with these, my idea is that you can always decide if you want this data to be recorded or
Hmm.
not, that they can always stick with you if you like so, then this could be helpful. Or you wear this cap and then you have a sensor there that is using, for example, infrared red light to find out your heart rate, so not the heartbeat on timing, but the heart rate, similar to smartwatches, for example. And I mean, this is also development that we saw in the recent years. So smartwatches get increasingly cheap and more accessible. People use it for running. It can be really great for health purposes to have a look at, okay, how well is it with my heartbeat and my blood pressure, oxygenation, and whatever. And so this can be extremely helpful. And VR and gaming can be of use in many different areas and would benefit from that. Yeah, and so I think there is a strong, strong use case for that.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. That was really really interesting. I'm glad that you found the time, and I'm glad that people found it interesting as well, the viewers. So, if there are any more questions, now would be the time for the chat to throw them in our direction. Or any other comments or anything that you want to share, maybe with each other. So I think it appears to me that that everyone has already put up their questions on the chat while we were talking, anyways, which is good. I think this is the way it should be. So I'm very, very happy. Again, very happy to have you here, and I hope to see you again soon. In this case, maybe for a beer in real life, because we're both in the same city. So. Oh yeah, there is a question. Sorry for the interruption. So, will private industries ever gain more insight into psychology than universities? Ooh,
Oh, interesting.
snap! Oh, that's a big one now.
Mhm. Mm. I
Good.
mean,
Oh my. Do we
is
even want to go there?
is the distinction so clear?
Huh.
So industry already do a lot of science. If you have a look at Amazon, for
Hmm.
example, what they do with their algorithms, so they already publish things. If you think about big pharma corporation, they already do a lot of science, and they unfortunately play with their own rules. So, for example, for these experts with the alpha values, p values, and
Hmm.
so on. So we usually in psychology agree to have a significance level of 5%. Yeah, pharma industry says 10%, so the likelihood is basically 10% of their findings are false positives, and they use these things with their own rules, and they can still decide, do they publish something or do they not publish it? And there's this huge debate. If you're interested and you really want to feel bad, read a paper about from Kirsch et al. I think 2017 about having this meta-analysis about all the data of the pharma industries with SSRIs and the
Hmm.
effectiveness of that. And so long story short, so the connection is not that clear cut. So because there's a lot of money, they can also think about, what do they want to fund and what do they not want to fund. And so there are even people doing their PhDs, for example, also from other firms of big tech industries. And they pay their PhDs to do their research, and always there's a scientific interest and this
Hmm.
conflict of interest. So these days we have some nice developments that we always have to say what is our conflict of interest,
Hmm.
and also the money that you sometimes get when you apply with certain companies. This is also something that I did before with some like company interest. You always have to say it, and it's highly problematic. And I think Marius and I, we could fill like 2 more hours with just talking about everything that's going wrong with science and about the conflicts of interest. Um, yeah, so this is one of the major points, that the cutting point is not as clear. And for the rest, I would need to think a little bit more. But I think in general, that could be possible. Who knows where this develops? If you have a look at the stock market price of Apple, for example, it is insane. It is much more money than many different universities combined have, much more than some countries have. And of course, where there's money, there is also power, unfortunately, and this power also extends into science.
Yeah, thinking about Neuralink already, right? I mean, Elon Musk
That's another
just said
example.
like, yeah, whatever. Let's just throw 200 millions in this direction of neurotechnology, and all of a sudden there's this one company, Neuralink, which has a higher funding than basically any kind of neuroscientific research before. There was never that much money in neuroscience than now there is with Neuralink. I don't think Neuralink is on the right track with what they are thinking they can attain, but it's undeniable that there is a lot of money in there, and I
Mhm.
think that's like I don't think that we will see anything that's close to like invasive BCI like Neuralink is doing it. Like I don't think we will see that for end users anytime soon, because opening the skull is ludicrous to do that voluntarily if you don't have to. Um, but it's much more easy to imagine Meta stuffing heart rate monitoring and eye tracking, which is already there in the Meta Quest Pro, and like probably will like it's not going to be there in the Quest 3, but maybe in the Quest 4 because they don't have a use case for it yet because they don't think straight in comparison to Apple. But anyways, So I think like if we're thinking about these companies, it's very easy to imagine that they will stuff these kind of like low-key physiological sensors in there, like heart rate, eye tracking, potentially like also subtle movement can be informative about like mental states. Blood pressure could be a thing with polyplethysmography, and yeah, ultimately also EEG if there's a good use case for them. And for the buyer, like the buyer needs to have a use case, and then Meta will be able to stuff them in, and then all of a sudden they will have lots of data. I think that's really a big danger. And
Yes,
yeah.
agreed.
And then, yeah, well, will they gain more insights into psychology than universities? Well, not necessarily, I would say, more insights into psychology per se, more insights into the people in, like, considering how they can get more money out of the people.
It's hard to disentangle what does psychology mean. It is there's so many different aspects of this, and I think in certain aspects, yes. For example, these are that are related to marketing.
Hmm.
I bet TikTok and
Oh,
Instagram
yeah.
are so all their marketing teams, so they to some extent know things much better than certain universities because they have much more funds and they have a bigger and better data set and what they can use. So in some aspects, I think this is likely and maybe already happening. But with some things where there's no money, with general psychology and really this fundamental knowledge that you cannot use, cannot put into any project. There it's great that we have universities
Hmm.
that are not so reliant on to making a product out of it, but with looking for funds, this is always a problem that I'm seeing. Also with this ECG device
Hmm.
that I mentioned, so we applied for many funds and projects. And most of the parts that I had to write about is, okay, which markets do we provide? And so to which markets can we extend? So what is the future and which marketing models do we have? And I
Hmm.
had to write all the things about marketing. One was I want to make good science. I want to provide open source and more healthcare technology for people
Hmm.
to make the world a little bit better for people also in remote areas who don't have access for this. And the majority of things that I had to do is where can I sell it? How can I sell it for what? And what are my marketing
Hmm.
strategies? Yeah, what is my revenue that I expect? And this is really heartbreaking to see, to get money for research, to publish papers, to fund all this, and that there's always this big money in the background that people want to achieve with it.
Absolutely, yeah. Money still does make the world go round, and even in science, it's not easy. It's you always sell it differently, but in the end,
Mm.
you're still begging for money if you're writing a project grant.
Yeah, that's a lot of science, and
Yeah, but let's
that's a
not go
depressing
there.
note
Yeah,
to end.
let's not go there
It's
right now. No, that was absolutely great. Fascinating talking with you as always, and I'm really looking forward to maybe I will like hopefully that hasn't been the last time you're on here. And I'm really looking forward to digging a little bit deeper into what kind of combination you can imagine that's happening between neuro feedback and gaming, and where we can go for like applying this kind of cool game stuff in serious psychological research, because I'm not a psychologist. So it's always important to get that perspective here.
Sure, I'm happy to do so. Maybe there are coming some questions. I'm happy to be here a second time.
Yeah,
If the
that's
viewers
great.
like, I can also give a demo at one point of this device, how this
Yeah,
works. Maybe show some videos of the heart rate in virtual reality context and different contexts. So very open for that, and also a beer in person in Berlin
absolutely.
with Marius.
Okay, great.
Great.
So,
Yeah.
have a great evening, and have a great evening, day, or afternoon, morning, or wherever you are right now. Everyone watching this right now, I'm glad you were there. I'm glad you were there, and I'm looking
Was a pleasure.
forward to the next time. I'm going to stop the stream and we can let's roll it out off stream.
Yes.
Bye
Bye-bye.
everyone.